At 19, she married a 74-year-old millionaire. Everyone suspected her motives, but when Emily Johnson felt the weight of every gaze upon her as she walked toward the altar. At 19, she was about to marry Walter Richardson, a 74-year-old businessman who had made his fortune in New York City's real estate industry. The whispers of the guests echoed through the church, and she could imagine exactly what they were thinking. The ceremony had been arranged quickly in just 2 weeks, which only fueled more speculation. Walter had insisted they didn't need to wait, especially given his advanced age. Emily clutched the bouquet of white roses with slightly trembling hands, not from wedding nerves, but from the pressure of keeping a secret no one else knew. When she finally reached the altar, Walter greeted her with a gentle smile. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and his perfectly tailored black suit accentuated his still upright posture despite his age. He took her hands carefully, as if holding something fragile and precious. Among the guests, Emily's family was visibly uncomfortable. Her mother, Karen Johnson, a 52-year-old nurse at Mercy General Hospital, wore a forced smile. She had spent weeks trying to convince her daughter to reconsider, to no avail. Beside her, Emily's father, Robert Johnson, a 58-year-old retired mechanic, watched the ceremony with a stern, worried expression. Walter's family also seemed surprised. His eldest son, Richard Richardson, a 45-year-old lawyer, was there with his wife Jennifer, but the two exchanged disapproving glances throughout the ceremony. Richard had tried to talk his father out of this rushed marriage, questioning the young bride's true intentions. The priest began the ceremony with the traditional words, but Emily could barely focus. Her mind was fixed on the real reason she was standing there, a secret she had kept for 3 months, one that had completely changed the course of her life. She looked at Walter and saw in his eyes the same determination that had convinced her to accept this unconventional proposal. When it came time for the vows, Walter held Emily's hands more firmly and spoke in a clear voice that echoed through the church. His words were carefully chosen, speaking of companionship, mutual care, and the importance of protecting those we love. Emily responded with simple but sincere vows, promising to stand by him in good times and bad. The exchange of rings happened in tense silence. The bands were simple, but the diamond on Emily's ring sparkled under the candlelight. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was chaste and respectful, more like the affection between a grandfather and his granddaughter than between newlyweds. The reception was held in the banquet hall of the club, where Walter had been a member for over 30 years. The elegant setting, with crystal chandeliers and classic decor, contrasted with the palpable tension among the guests. The tables were arranged traditionally, with each family occupying separate spaces, as if an invisible divide ran through the room. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now back to the story. During dinner, the conversations were polite but strained. Count Deborah, Karen's sharp-tongued older sister and a 63-year-old woman, couldn't hide her disapproval. She approached Emily during the cocktail hour and whispered questions about the speed of the wedding, hinting that there was something suspicious about the union. Emily tried to remain calm, but her aunt's words echoed in her mind as she greeted the guests. Every handshake, every congratulatory hug came with curious glances and hushed comments. She could feel the judgment from the people, especially the older women present who clearly questioned her motives. Walter, on the other hand, moved through the room with the ease of someone accustomed to social events. He introduced Emily with genuine pride, treating her with the respect and courtesy of a true gentleman. His business friends, men his own, Hage greeted him with knowing smiles, as if they perfectly understood his decision to marry such a young woman. The first major tension of the evening arose when Richard, Walter's son, asked to speak with Emily privately. They stepped away to a more secluded corner of the room, near the large windows overlooking the club's garden. Richard, a tall and polished man with features reminiscent of his father in his youth, looked directly into Emily's eyes with a serious expression. He openly questioned her intentions with his father, mentioning the age difference and the swiftness of the marriage. His words were careful but direct, Making it clear that he and the rest of the family were concerned Emily might only be interested in Walter's fortune. Emily responded calmly, but inside she felt attacked and unfairly judged. The conversation was interrupted when Jennifer, Richard's wife, approached with an equally concerned expression. She mentioned knowing several stories of young women taking advantage of older, wealthy men, indirectly suggesting Emily might be following the same pattern. The words were spoken in a seemingly cordial tone, but the poison behind them was evident. Emily felt pressured and uncomfortable, but before she could respond properly, Walter joined the group. He had sensed the tension in the air, and with his experience in business negotiations quickly changed the subject. He complimented the party's organization and mentioned it was time to cut the cake, effectively ending the awkward conversation. The cake-cutting moment was photographed by several guests, but the expressions in the photos revealed more tension than joy. Emily forced a smile as she held the knife alongside Walter, but her mind was fixed on Richard and Jennifer's words. She knew those suspicions and questions were only the beginning of a series of challenges she would have to face. After the reception, the newlyweds headed to Walter's mansion in the Upper East Side of New York City. The house, a tastefully renovated 1940s construction, impressed Emily with its well-kept gardens and classic architecture. Yet, the beauty of the place couldn't dispel the unease she felt crossing the front door as the new lady of the house. Walter showed Emily her new quarters, a spacious, elegantly decorated bedroom that had been prepared especially for her. The space reflected the care he had taken to make her feel comfortable, with classic yet functional furniture and a privileged view of the garden. He made it clear he would fully respect her space and privacy, reinforcing the peculiar nature of their marital arrangement. During the first days of marriage, Emily began to understand Walter's routine better. He woke up early every morning to walk in the garden, a practice he had maintained for decades to take care of his health. Afterward, he would have a simple coffee while reading newspapers and checking emails related to his business. Despite his age, he remained actively involved in several companies, primarily as an advisor and investor. Their early days together were marked by long conversations during meals. Walter was a cultured and interesting man who had traveled the world in decades past and owned an impressive library in his home. He shared stories about his business journey, from his first ventures in the 1970s to building the real estate empire he owned today. Emily, in turn, talked about her dreams of studying medicine, a goal that had been interrupted by her family's financial struggles. She had graduated high school with excellent grades, but college tuition was beyond her parents' means. Walter listened with genuine interest, asking about her favorite subjects and future plans. The first week of marriage passed relatively smoothly, but external pressures soon began to intensify. Karen, Emily's mother, called every day, ostensibly to check on how she was adjusting, but always asking indirect questions about the marriage's dynamics and Walter's intentions. Emily sensed her mother's genuine concern, but also felt the weight of unspoken suspicions. The situation grew more complicated when curious neighbors started making comments. Walter's mansion was on a street where residents had known each other for years, and the arrival of such a young wife did not go unnoticed. Mrs. Eleanor, a 70-year-old woman who lived next door, frequently dropped by under the guise of welcoming Emily, but was clearly interested in gathering information about the unusual marriage. During one such visit, Mrs. Eleanor remarked on other similar situations she had witnessed over the years, always ending with observations about how such relationships rarely lasted long. Her words seemed innocent, but carried implications that left Emily uncomfortable and defensive. The pressure escalated further when Richard decided to pay his father a surprise visit. He arrived at the mansion on a Thursday afternoon, accompanied by Jennifer and their twin 8-year-old sons, Ethan and Noah. The visit had been strategically planned to observe the marriage up close and better understand Emily's true motivations. During dinner that evening, the tension at the table was palpable. Richard asked seemingly casual questions about the couple's future plans, how Emily was adjusting to her new life, and possible changes in Walter's routine. His inquiries carried an investigative tone disguised as familial concern, and Emily constantly felt pressured to justify her presence in the house. Jennifer, meanwhile, watched Emily's every move closely, from how she served herself food to how she interacted with Walter. She made subtle remarks about the generational gap, mentioning how difficult it was for people of such different ages to find lasting common ground. Her words were carefully chosen to sound neutral, but the subtext was clear. The situation reached a breaking point when Ethan, one of the twins, innocently asked why the new grandma was so young and why she didn't have children. The child's question created an awkward silence at the table, and Emily felt all eyes turn to her. Walter quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. The innocent question had brought to the surface what everyone was thinking, but avoiding saying out loud. After Richard and his family left, Walter noticed Emily's discomfort and tried to comfort her. He explained that the family was just worried and that with time, they would better understand the situation. However, Emily began questioning whether she had made the right decision, especially considering the constant pressure she was facing from all sides. The second week of marriage brought new challenges when Emily decided to visit her parents for the first time since the wedding. The reception at home was mixed, with Karen showing genuine joy at seeing her, but also asking constant questions about her new life. Robert, her father, remained more reserved, clearly still processing his daughter's decision. During lunch at the simple Johnson family home in Astoria, the contrast between the two worlds became evident. The two-bedroom house, modestly but lovingly furnished, seemed tiny compared to the mansion where Emily now lived. Karen had prepared her daughter's favorite dish, but the meal unfolded amid palpable tension. Robert finally voiced his concerns, directly questioning whether Emily had truly thought through the consequences of this marriage. He mentioned the age difference, the speed of the decision, and especially his doubts about the longevity of the relationship. His words were harsh but came from a place of paternal love and genuine concern. Emily tried to explain that there were important reasons for her decision, though she didn't reveal the true secret that had led her there. She spoke of Walter's kindness and gentleness, how he treated her with respect, and the opportunities the marriage could provide. Yet her explanations sounded vague and unconvincing to her parents. The situation grew even more complicated when Karen mentioned that neighbors and family acquaintances were making comments about the marriage. She recounted awkward conversations at work, where colleagues asked intrusive questions about her daughter's motivations. Karen admitted feeling embarrassed and unsure how to respond to the speculation. Aunt Deborah, who had been invited to lunch, didn't hold back her criticism. She openly expressed her disapproval, mentioning cases she knew of young women who married wealthy older men purely for financial gain. Her words were particularly harsh, suggesting Emily had abandoned her family's values in exchange for a life of luxury. The lunch ended tensely, with Emily feeling attacked and misunderstood by her own family. She left her parents' house with a heavy heart, realizing the gap between her old life and her new one was widening quickly. The walk to the bus stop was painful, especially when she remembered she no longer needed to take public transportation, a stark reminder of how much her life had changed. Back at the mansion, Walter immediately noticed Emily's emotional state. He found her sitting in the garden, gazing at the horizon with a melancholy expression. His life experience had taught him to recognize difficult moments, and he approached, carefully, offering her a cup of tea and silent companionship. When Emily finally shared what had happened at her parents' house, Walter listened patiently without interrupting. He validated her feelings of frustration and misunderstanding, explaining that significant life changes often bring resistance and suspicion from those around them. His words were comforting, but also realistic about the challenges they still had to face. Walter then shared some experiences from his own life, times when his business decisions had been questioned and criticized by family and friends. He spoke about how he had learned to trust his own intuition and not be completely swayed by outside opinions, especially when he knew his intentions were genuine and well-meaning. The third week of marriage was marked by an attempt to establish a more normal routine. Emily began exploring Walter's library, discovering an impressive collection of books on medicine, history, and literature. Walter encouraged her interest, even suggesting she consider resuming her studies and offering Financial support so she could enroll in medical school. The idea of returning to school reignited a spark in Emily, but it also brought additional worries. She wondered if accepting his financial support would only confirm everyone's suspicions about her motives for marrying him. Moreover, she knew there were complex personal matters she hadn't yet revealed to Walter that could significantly complicate her educational plans. The situation grew more complicated when she received an unexpected call from Tyler, her ex-boyfriend. They had broken up 3 months earlier, but he had heard about the marriage through mutual acquaintances and was confused and hurt. Tyler was a 22-year-old who worked as a sales clerk in an electronics store and had once planned a future with Emily before their abrupt breakup. The phone call was difficult and emotionally charged. Tyler couldn't understand how Emily had gone from dating him to marrying a man who could be her grandfather in such a short time. He made painful accusations about her changing character and excessive ambition, words that cut deep because they touched on insecurities she already carried. Emily tried to explain that the situation was more complex than it seemed, but without revealing the true reasons. Her explanations sounded weak and unconvincing. Tyler took her vague words as confirmation that she had chosen money over true love, an accusation that left Emily emotionally devastated. The call ended painfully, with Tyler declaring he no longer recognized the person she had become. His final words were particularly cruel, suggesting she would have to live with the consequences of her choices when the reality of the marriage became unsustainable. Emily hung up in tears, feeling more isolated and misunderstood than ever. Walter found Emily crying in the living room and once again offered support without asking invasive questions. His respectful and gentle approach stood in stark contrast to the judgment she was receiving from others. He simply sat beside her, offering a handkerchief and his silent presence until she felt ready to speak. When Emily finally calmed down, she shared part of what had happened, mentioning Tyler's call without going into details about their past relationship. Walter listened patiently, then offered wise insights about how life changes often lead to the end of relationships that weren't strong enough to withstand major transitions. The 4th week of marriage brought a new challenge when Richard arrived at the mansion with legal documents. He had consulted a family law attorney and was concerned about matters related to his father's inheritance and assets. His unannounced arrival created a tense atmosphere, especially when he asked to speak with Walter privately. The conversation between father and son took place in Walter's study, but Emily could hear raised voices through the closed door. Richard was clearly pressuring his father to consider a retroactive prenuptial agreement or other legal measures to protect the family assets. His concerns were understandable from a family standpoint, but the way he presented them came across as a direct accusation against Emily. Walter, however, stood his ground firmly. He explained to his son that he had made his decision with full awareness and saw no need for legal changes. His response was polite but definitive, making it clear he wouldn't tolerate interference in his personal life, regardless of legitimate family concerns. The discussion escalated when Richard mentioned he had discreetly looked into Emily's past and uncovered details about her family's financial situation and her previous relationship with Tyler. He presented this information as evidence that she might have questionable motives for the marriage, a suggestion that visibly angered Walter. For the first time since Emily had known him, Walter showed real irritation. He made it clear to his son that he considered the investigation an unacceptable invasion of privacy and a lack of respect toward both him and Emily. His voice took on an authoritative tone, revealing decades of business leadership experience. That brooked no argument. The conversation ended with Richard leaving the house visibly frustrated and worried. Before leaving, he made one last attempt to persuade his father to reconsider, mentioning he was only trying to protect the family's interests. Walter replied that he was perfectly capable of managing his own affairs and expected his son to respect his decisions. After Richard's departure, Walter sought out Emily to explain what had happened. He was transparent about his son's concerns, but also made it clear he didn't share those suspicions. His trust in Emily was genuine, based on his own observations, and intuition honed over decades of experience with people. Emily felt grateful for Walter's support, but also uneasy about Richard's investigations. She worried he might uncover details she hadn't yet shared with Walter, information that could significantly complicate the already delicate situation. Her anxiety grew as she realized keeping secrets was becoming increasingly difficult and risky. The 5th week of marriage was marked by an attempt to settle into a routine. Emily began participating more actively in Walter's social life, accompanying him to business events and dinners with friends. These occasions were challenging, as she constantly felt watched and judged by people who clearly questioned her presence beside Walter. During a dinner at the club with other retired businessmen and their wives, Emily experienced her first full evening of prying questions and subtly hostile remarks. The wives, women in their 60s and 70s, asked seemingly polite questions about her plans, her family, and how she'd met Walter, but always with an undertone of suspicion. Mrs. Barbara, the wife of Walter's former business partner, was particularly blunt when questioning the couple's plans for children. She mentioned that young women usually marry with motherhood in mind and wondered how that would work given Walter's advanced age. The question created an awkward moment, especially since it touched on issues Emily hadn't fully discussed with her husband. Walter noticed Emily's discomfort and skillfully changed the subject, but the damage was done. For the rest of the evening, Emily felt as if she were on display, every word and gesture scrutinized by people who had already formed opinions about her. The experience was emotionally exhausting and reinforced her sense of social isolation. On the way home, Walter apologized for his friend's behavior, explaining that people from his generation sometimes struggled to accept unconventional situations. He assured Emily that with time, they would grow accustomed to her presence and learn to respect her. However, Emily began to question whether she could endure this kind of social scrutiny indefinitely. The situation grew even more complicated when Karen called to say she had run into Tyler at the supermarket and that he had asked questions about Emily. Apparently, he was still processing the end of their relationship and Emily's sudden marriage, mentioning his intention to speak with her in person to get the answers he felt he needed to move on. Emily was alarmed at the possibility of Tyler showing up at the mansion or trying to contact her directly. She knew he was aware of details about her life that could become problematic if revealed at the wrong time or in the wrong way. The prospect of dealing with Tyler, while already facing pressure from all sides, significantly heightened her anxiety. The 6th week brought the dreaded challenge when Tyler actually appeared at the mansion. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon while Walter was out for his daily neighborhood walk. Emily answered the door and was shocked to see her ex-boyfriend standing at the entrance, his expression determined yet visibly shaken. Tyler asked to talk, insisting he needed to understand what had really happened so he could accept the situation and move on with his life. Feeling pressured, Emily hesitated, but eventually agreed to speak with him in the front garden, hoping the conversation would be brief and that Walter wouldn't return from his walk before it ended. The conversation was intense and emotionally charged. Tyler expressed his confusion and pain, questioning how Emily had gone from a serious relationship with him to marrying a much older stranger in just a few weeks. He accused her of hiding her true personality the entire time they were together, suggesting she had always been more ambitious than she let on. Emily tried to explain that the situation was more complicated than it seemed, but her words came across as vague and evasive because she couldn't reveal the real reasons. Tyler took her explanations as confirmation that she had fundamentally changed and chosen a life of luxury over genuine love. His accusations were painful, striking at deep insecurities Emily carried. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The situation grew even tenser when Walter returned from his walk and found Emily talking to an unfamiliar young man in the garden. His expression showed surprise, but he approached with his usual courtesy and waited to be introduced. Emily, visibly nervous, introduced Tyler as an old friend, a description that was technically true but omitted important details. Tyler, in turn, looked visibly uncomfortable in Walter's presence. The age difference was even more jarring in person than he had imagined, and he struggled to maintain his composure. Walter, with his experience in delicate social situations, guided the conversation politely but firmly, subtly making it clear that the visit should come to an end. Before leaving, Tyler made one last appeal to Emily, suggesting she still had time to reconsider her choices. His words were measured because of Walter's presence, but their meaning was clear to Emily. He left behind a tense atmosphere and many unanswered questions hanging in the air. After Tyler's departure, Walter gently questioned Emily about the nature of the visit. She explained that Tyler was simply an old friend struggling to accept her marriage, an edited version of the truth that omitted the depth of their past relationship. Walter accepted her explanation without pressing for details, but Emily sensed she had planted the first seeds of doubt in her husband's mind. The 7th week was marked by growing inner tension for Emily. She was beginning to realize that keeping secrets was becoming increasingly difficult and was affecting her ability to build a genuine relationship with Walter. At the same time, she feared revealing the whole truth might destroy the stability she had found in her new life. The situation grew more complicated when she received a call from her doctor, Dr. Sarah Thompson, requesting a follow-up appointment. The call came while Walter was present, forcing Emily to invent an excuse about routine tests to justify the visit. Her nervousness during the call didn't go unnoticed by Walter, who began picking up on small signs of anxiety he couldn't fully explain. At the medical appointment, Dr. Sarah expressed concern about Emily's stress levels. She asked whether the young woman was coping well with the significant changes in her life and if she was receiving the necessary support during this transition. The conversation touched on important issues Emily had been avoiding. The doctor also mentioned the importance of honesty in relationships, especially during major life changes. Her words, though not specific, resonated deeply with Emily, who was wrestling with guilt over keeping important information from Walter. She left the appointment more conflicted and confused than ever. Back at the mansion, Emily encountered an unexpected situation. Richard had returned, this time accompanied by a private investigator he had hired to dig into Emily's past. They were in Walter's office, presenting a detailed report that included information about her family, education, past relationship with Tyler, and other personal details. The discussion in the office grew heated, with Walter expressing frustration over his son's invasion of privacy. Richard argued he was only trying to protect the family's interests and that the information raised legitimate questions about Emily's motives. The tension between father and son reached a breaking point, with both holding firm and seemingly irreconcilable positions. Emily, who arrived home in the middle of the argument, heard her life being dissected and analyzed like evidence in a courtroom. The experience was humiliating and devastating, especially because she knew there were still crucial details even the investigator hadn't uncovered. She felt like an object under scrutiny, rather than a person with feelings and dignity. The argument ended with Richard issuing an ultimatum to his father. Either Walter took legal steps to protect the family's assets, or Richard would explore other options to safeguard his own interests and those of his children. The threat was veiled but clear, hinting at possible legal actions that could challenge Walter's mental competence or the validity of the marriage. Walter was visibly shaken by his son's threat. As much as he disagreed with Richard's suspicions, he couldn't completely ignore the concerns about the family's future and the legacy he had built over decades. For the first time, Emily saw uncertainty in her husband's eyes, a crack in the confidence he had shown until then. After Richard's tense departure, Walter sought Emily out for a serious conversation. He explained the delicate situation they were in and expressed his need to better understand certain aspects of her life that seemed to be causing concern within the family. His questions were gentle but direct, focusing especially on her relationship with Tyler and the circumstances that had led to their quick marriage. Emily found herself in an impossible dilemma. On one hand, she wanted to be honest with Walter, who had been understanding and respectful from the beginning. On the other hand, she feared the full truth might destroy everything she had built and leave her in an even worse situation than before. Her hesitation was interpreted by Walter as possible confirmation of some of the suspicions raised. The 8th week was marked by a growing tension in the mansion. Walter maintained his usual courtesy, but Emily noticed a distance that hadn't been there before. He seemed to be processing information and re-evaluating situations, a process that left them both uneasy. Their mealtime conversations became more superficial, avoiding topics that might lead to deeper questioning. The situation worsened when Karen called with disturbing news. She had been approached at work by people claiming to represent Richard, asking questions about the Johnson family's financial situation and any recent changes in Emily's behavior. Karen was confused and worried, not understanding why she was being investigated. Emily was furious when she learned the investigation had extended to her family. She realized Richard was expanding his scope, possibly searching for any information he could use to question the validity of the marriage or her motivations. The invasion of her parents' privacy was the last straw, making her consider taking more drastic measures. That same week, she received an unexpected call from Jennifer, Richard's wife. The conversation was seemingly cordial, with Jennifer inviting her to lunch to get to know her better. However, Emily sensed the invitation was actually an attempt to gather more information under the guise of friendliness. Emily decided to accept, hoping to clarify misunderstandings and perhaps reduce the hostility from Walter's family. The lunch was scheduled at an elegant restaurant in downtown New York City, a public place where Jennifer likely expected Emily to feel more comfortable speaking openly. The meeting began civilly, with Jennifer asking seemingly casual questions about Emily's adjustment to her new life. Gradually, however, the questions became more specific and probing. Jennifer inquired about the couple's future plans, the quick marriage, and especially Emily's motivations for entering a relationship with such a significant age gap. Emily tried to answer honestly but vaguely, avoiding details that could be used against her later. Yet Jennifer was sharp and skilled at reading people. Sensing Emily was withholding important information, she intensified her questions, focusing particularly on the circumstances that had ended Emily's relationship with Tyler and sparked her interest in Walter. The conversation reached a critical point when Jennifer mentioned she had spoken with some people who knew Emily Johnson before the marriage. She revealed she was aware of financial difficulties in the Johnson family and certain aspects of the previous relationship that hadn't been mentioned before. Her information was accurate, enough to make it clear the investigation had gone deeper than Emily had imagined. Jennifer then made a shocking proposal. She offered a significant sum of money for Emily to annul the marriage and voluntarily walk away from Walter Richardson's life. She argued it would be better for everyone involved, including Emily herself, who could use the money to solve her family's financial troubles and start fresh without the social pressure she was facing. The offer left Emily both outraged and tempted. On one hand, she felt insulted by the suggestion that she could be bought like a commodity. On the other, the amount offered was substantial enough to resolve major problems she had left behind. She asked for time to consider the proposal, a response Jennifer took as a sign that negotiations were possible. The lunch ended with palpable tension, though both maintained superficial politeness. Jennifer made it clear the offer stood, but there were also less pleasant alternatives if Emily didn't cooperate willingly. The implicit threat was obvious. Either she accepted, or the family would escalate efforts to make her life impossible. Back at the mansion, Emily felt more pressured than ever. Jennifer's proposal had touched on vulnerable points, especially her concerns about her parents' financial situation and the constant social pressure she was under. She began seriously questioning whether she could keep living this way indefinitely. The situation grew even more complicated when Walter casually mentioned receiving a call from his lawyer about family matters. He didn't elaborate, but made it clear he was considering legal changes to protect all interests involved. Emily took this as a sign he was starting to yield to his family's pressure. The 9th week was marked by a series of events that intensified the crisis. First, Tyler showed up at the mansion again, this time more desperate and emotional. He had lost his job and was facing personal issues he partly blamed on the emotional toll of the breakup and Emily's sudden marriage. The conversation with Tyler was more intense than the last. He begged Emily to reconsider her choices, insisting there was still time to fix what he saw as a terrible mistake. His words carried genuine emotion, but also an emotional weight that left Emily even more conflicted about her decisions. Things grew more complicated when Walter returned unexpectedly and found Emily in tears after talking to Tyler. This time, his patience and understanding seemed to be wearing thin. He asked more direct questions about her past relationship and why Tyler kept reappearing in their lives. Emily found herself forced to reveal more details, including that the relationship had been more serious than she had initially admitted. She explained that Tyler had been her boyfriend for over a year, and they had made serious plans for the future before the abrupt breakup. The revelation raised more questions about her motives and the sincerity of her earlier explanations. Walter listened with growing concern. Though he maintained his respectful demeanor, it was clear that the trust he had placed in Emily was being shaken. He began questioning whether he had been completely honest with himself about the situation and if his own motivations had clouded his judgment. Tensions rose when Richard reappeared, this time with legal documents he had prepared, unilaterally. He had consulted family law specialists and was proposing specific legal measures to protect Walter's assets. The documents included proposals for post-nuptial agreements and other safeguards that would essentially severely limit any rights Emily might have to the family's wealth. The presentation of these papers created the biggest crisis yet in the relationship between Walter and Richard. Walter was outraged by his son's unilateral move, especially because he felt he was being treated as if he were incapable of making his own decisions. Yet he couldn't entirely ignore the logic behind the concerns raised. The argument between father and son was their most intense yet, with both raising their voices and expressing frustrations that had been building for weeks. Richard argued he was only trying to protect the family legacy, while Walter insisted his personal choices shouldn't require family approval. The argument revealed deeper tensions that went beyond the marriage issue. Emily, who was present for part of the discussion, felt utterly humiliated and reduced to a legal problem to be solved. She realized she was being seen not as a person with feelings and rights, but as a potential threat to the family's fortune. The experience was devastating to her self-esteem and her sense of belonging in that family. The argument ended without resolution, with Richard leaving the house visibly frustrated and threatening to take independent legal action if necessary. His final words were a warning that he wouldn't allow the family's wealth to be put at risk, regardless of his father's personal feelings. After Richard's departure, Walter looked visibly shaken. For the first time since Emily had known him, he seemed truly old and weary. The family pressure, combined with his own growing doubts, was clearly taking a toll on his physical and emotional health. Emily felt guilty for being the cause of so much family conflict and tension. The 10th week brought a new complication when Dr. Sarah called again, this time with greater urgency. She insisted Emily schedule an in-person appointment, mentioning there were important matters to discuss. The doctor's insistence heightened Emily's anxiety, as she was already dealing with pressures from multiple directions. At the appointment, Dr. Sarah expressed serious concern about the level of stress Emily was showing. She directly asked whether the young woman was facing any kind of pressure or threat that might be affecting her physical and mental health. Her questions were straightforward and professional, but revealed genuine concern for her patient's well-being. The doctor also mentioned she had observed physical signs of prolonged stress and suggested Emily consider seeking psychological support to cope with the pressures she was under. She emphasized the importance of having a proper support system during periods of significant life change. During the consultation, Dr. Sarah made an observation that left Emily particularly thoughtful. She mentioned that major life changes often force people to reevaluate their priorities and values, and that sometimes we discover choices that initially seemed right may not be sustainable in the long run. Her words weren't specific, but they resonated deeply with the internal conflicts Emily was facing. The session ended with Dr. Sarah suggesting that Emily consider talking to someone she trusted about her concerns, especially if there were aspects of her situation she couldn't handle alone. The suggestion was gentle but clear, Emily needed more support than she was currently receiving. Back at the mansion, Emily found an even tenser atmosphere. Walter had received a call from Richard, announcing his intention to seek independent legal counsel about possible measures to protect the family's interests. The threat was clear. If Walter didn't act voluntarily, Richard would consider more drastic legal options. The pressure on Walter was evident. He was being forced to choose between supporting his wife and maintaining family harmony. His business experience had taught him to weigh risks and benefits, but the current situation involved complex emotional issues that couldn't be resolved with business logic alone. That evening, Walter asked to have a serious talk with Emily. He explained the pressures he was facing from the family and his own need to better understand certain aspects of the situation. His questions were respectful but direct, focusing especially on the discrepancies between her initial explanations and the information that had come to light later. Emily found herself confronted with a critical decision. Either she revealed the whole truth about her motivations for the marriage, risking the consequences of that revelation, or she continued keeping secrets and watched the situation gradually deteriorate. Both options seemed risky and potentially devastating. The conversation stretched late into the night, with Walter expressing his own vulnerabilities and concerns. He admitted to doubts about his own motivations for the marriage and questioned whether he'd been fair to Emily by involving her in such a complex situation. His honesty surprised Emily and created a moment of genuine connection between them. However, even this moment of connection was interrupted when the phone rang. It was Jennifer, calling to pressure for an answer about the proposal she'd made at lunch. She mentioned that the offer wouldn't remain available indefinitely and that other measures were being considered if Emily didn't cooperate voluntarily. Jennifer's call left Walter confused, questioning what conversations had apparently taken place without his knowledge. Emily was forced to explain about the lunch and the proposal she'd received, a revelation that shocked Walter and made him wonder how many other important details were being withheld. The 11th week was marked by an escalation in tensions that seemed unsustainable. Richard showed up at the mansion with formal legal documents, including a petition to evaluate Walter's mental capacity and questions about the validity of the marriage. The legal action represented a dramatic escalation in the family conflict and created a crisis that could no longer be ignored. Walter was devastated by his son's move. He had built a business empire based on his reputation and competence, and seeing his mental capacity publicly questioned was deeply humiliating. The perceived betrayal was even more painful than the earlier pressures, creating a rift in the father-son relationship that seemed irreparable. The legal action also placed Emily in an extremely vulnerable position. The documents included specific allegations about her motivations for the marriage and questions about the validity of Walter's consent. She realized she was being painted as a manipulator who had taken advantage of a vulnerable elderly man. The situation grew even more complicated when the local media took an interest in the story. A reporter had uncovered the legal action and was investigating the case as an example of potential elder exploitation. The media attention brought a public dimension to the conflict, making it even harder for either side to back down or seek a private resolution. Emily found herself facing not only the pressure from Walter's family, but also the possibility of humiliating public exposure. The thought of having her personal life dissected in the media was terrifying, especially considering there were aspects of her situation that hadn't yet been publicly revealed. Walter, for his part, was dealing with his son's betrayal and the legal implications of the lawsuit. His lawyers advised him to seriously consider a settlement to avoid a drawn-out public trial that could be damaging for everyone involved. Yet he was reluctant to give in to the pressure, seeing it as an admission that he had made a mistake in judgment. The strain on both of them reached a breaking point when Richard's lawyer made a settlement offer that included annulling the marriage in exchange for dropping the legal claims. The proposal was framed as a solution that would allow all parties to save face and avoid further public scrutiny. However, for Emily and Walter, it represented a forced admission that their marriage had been a mistake. The 12th week brought additional pressure when Emily's parents were contacted directly by Richard's legal representatives. They were informed about the lawsuit and questioned about their knowledge of their daughter's motivations for the marriage. The approach was presented as an attempt to protect Emily from more serious legal consequences, but it was clearly meant to pressure the family into convincing her to accept a settlement. Karen and Robert were distraught over the legal implications. That could affect their daughter. They called Emily in a panic, begging her to reconsider her position and accept any deal that might shield her from harsher consequences. Their pleas were filled with genuine fear, but also added more pressure at a time when Emily already felt overwhelmed. The situation hit a new low when Tyler reappeared, this time after reading about the case in the local press. He was shocked to discover Emily's marriage had become a public legal matter and offered emotional support, though in a confused and conflicted way. His presence only further complicated an already impossible situation. Tyler confessed he still had feelings for Emily and was willing to stand by her regardless of the circumstances that had led to the marriage. His words were sincere, but also revealed he still didn't fully grasp the complexity of the situation. He offered to testify on her behalf without truly understanding the legal and personal implications of his involvement. Tyler's presence created additional tension with Walter, who began seriously questioning the earlier explanations about the nature of that relationship. He realized there had been deeper emotional ties in Emily's past than had initially been disclosed, fueling his own doubts about her motivations. The 13th week was marked by a desperate attempt to find a solution that could satisfy everyone. Walter hired his own family law attorneys to develop a defense strategy. He was determined to fight his son's claims, but also recognized the need to protect Emily from more severe legal consequences. Walter's attorneys suggested several strategies, including questioning Richard's motives and presenting evidence of Walter's full mental capacity. However, they also warned about the emotional and financial costs of a prolonged legal battle, especially considering the media attention the case was attracting. During the legal meetings, it became clear that Emily would have to reveal more details about her personal motivations if they wanted to build an effective defense. The attorneys needed to fully understand the circumstances that led to the marriage to properly challenge the allegations of manipulation and financial interest. Emily found herself facing the inevitable need to disclose the secret she had kept all these months. She realized there was no way to avoid the truth anymore, especially if she wanted to protect herself and Walter from the legal consequences of Richard's actions. The decision to be completely honest was terrifying, but it seemed like the only option left. The revelation came during a private meeting between Emily, Walter, and their attorneys. With a trembling voice, filled with nerves and emotion, Emily finally told the full truth about her reasons for the marriage. She revealed that she had discovered she was pregnant with Tyler 3 months before the wedding, but had lost the baby in a traumatic event that had left both her and Tyler emotionally shattered. The miscarriage had happened naturally, but it had been devastating for them both. Tyler had reacted with guilt and anger, blaming himself and their life circumstances for the loss. He had become obsessed with the idea that if they had more financial resources, they could have prevented what happened. His reaction had created a toxic dynamic in their relationship, making it impossible for them to stay together. Emily explained that she had ended things with Tyler because she couldn't handle the guilt and pressure he was putting on both of them. She was dealing with her own grief over losing the baby and needed space to process her emotions. The breakup had been painful, but necessary for their mental well-being. It was during this period of grief and confusion that Emily had met Walter by chance during a medical appointment, where she was working as a temporary assistant. They had spoken briefly, and Walter had sensed she was going through a difficult time. His kindness and wisdom had offered the kind of emotional support she desperately needed. Walter had offered help, completely selflessly, including support for her to resume her studies and rebuild her life. However, when social and family pressures began to intensify on both sides, they had agreed that a formal marriage could provide protection and stability for them both. For Walter, it offered companionship and purpose in his later years. For Emily, it offered security and a chance to start over. The truth created a heavy silence in the room. Walter was processing information that completely reshaped his understanding of the situation. He realized Emily had been dealing with much deeper trauma and grief than he had imagined, and her motivations were far more complex than simple financial interest. The attorneys acknowledged that the truth, though complicated, offered a much more compelling narrative than the speculations Richard had presented. They saw opportunities to build a defense based on mutual compassion and genuine support, rather than the one-sided exploitation that had been alleged. However, the revelation also brought new complications. Walter had to process the fact that significant information had been withheld during months of marriage. Though he understood the reasons for the secrecy, he also felt betrayed by the lack of trust that had prevented Emily from sharing something so important. The 14th week was spent dealing with the emotional fallout of the revelation. Walter needed time to process everything he had learned and reassess his own feelings about the marriage. He had married believing he was offering support to a young woman in distress, only to discover the situation was far more complex and painful than he had imagined. Emily, in turn, felt both relieved and terrified. Revealing the truth had lifted the weight of the secret she'd carried, but it also left her completely vulnerable. She didn't know how Walter would react in the long run, or how this information might affect the legal case they were facing. The situation grew more complicated when news of the lost pregnancy somehow reached Richard and his lawyers. They began investigating this new information, attempting to use it to bolster their claims that Emily had been emotionally unstable and had questionable motives for the marriage. Richard argued that the revelation only confirmed his suspicions that critical information had been hidden. He suggested that if Emily had lied about something so significant, there was no reason to believe other explanations she had offered. His lawyers presented this as evidence of systematic dishonesty. Richard's approach infuriated Walter, who saw it as a cruel exploitation of a traumatic situation. He began to realize his son was more interested in winning the legal battle than genuinely protecting the family's interests. This realization deepened the rift in their relationship. The 15th week brought a surprising development when Tyler decided to publicly support Emily's defense. He had learned about the legal case through the media and decided he couldn't stay silent while watching Emily be publicly attacked. His choice to testify in her favor created a new dynamic in the case. Tyler offered a unique perspective on the circumstances that had led to the end of his relationship with Emily. He confirmed the pregnancy and the traumatic loss of the baby, but also publicly admitted that his own reaction had contributed to their breakup. His honesty about his mistakes lent credibility to Emily's version of events. More importantly, Tyler clarified that Emily had never shown interest in money or material status during their time together. He testified about her character and genuine motivations, providing evidence that contradicted Richard's claims about her supposed manipulative tendencies. Tyler's testimony was emotionally difficult for everyone involved. For Emily, it meant publicly reliving one of the most painful periods of her life. For Walter, it confirmed he had judged his wife's character correctly, but also brought painful details about the depth of her past relationship. Tyler's statement also had a significant impact on public opinion. The media began portraying the situation more sympathetically, focusing on the personal tragedy that had led to the marriage rather than speculating about financial motives. This shift in the public narrative put pressure on Richard to reconsider his approach. The 16th week was marked by a gradual change in the case's dynamics. Walter's attorneys managed to present compelling evidence of his full mental capacity, including recent medical evaluations and witness testimonies about his business acumen. Richard's claims of mental incapacity were proving unfounded. Simultaneously, the narrative of mutual compassion and genuine support was gaining credibility. Witnesses were called to testify about the character of both Emily and Walter, including household staff, neighbors, and professional acquaintances who could attest to the respectful and genuine nature of their relationship. Public opinion was also turning against Richard. His invasive investigative methods and the nature of his allegations began to be seen as cruel attacks against a young woman who had endured significant trauma. Sympathy for Emily and Walter's situation grew steadily. However, Richard wasn't willing to back down easily. He hired new attorneys specializing in complex family law cases and began developing a more sophisticated legal strategy. His new representatives suggested focusing less on claims of mental incapacity and more on undue influence and exploitation of emotional vulnerability. This new legal approach was subtler, but potentially more dangerous. Instead of directly attacking Walter's mental capacity, Richard's lawyers argued he had been influenced during a period of loneliness and age-related emotional vulnerability. They framed the marriage as the result of sophisticated psychological manipulation. The 17th week brought new challenges when Jennifer decided to escalate her own actions. Frustrated with the direction the case was taking, she began reaching out directly to the media, offering her own version of events. Her interviews painted Emily as a cunning opportunist who had identified and exploited an elderly man's vulnerabilities. Jennifer's statements were particularly damaging because they came from a family member and appeared to be based on personal observation. She described Emily's behavior in ways that suggested calculation and premeditation, arguing that no 19-year-old girl would genuinely be interested in a 74-year-old man without ulterior motives. Jennifer's media campaign created a new public relations crisis for Emily and Walter. They found themselves defending not only against legal actions, but also against a public narrative shaped by people with privileged access to the family and a history of respectability in the community. The situation worsened when some of Jennifer's friends, prominent women in New York society, began making public statements supporting her position. They framed the case as an important example of protecting vulnerable seniors, portraying their actions as a moral duty rather than personal attacks. Emily felt completely overwhelmed by the coordinated campaign against her. The constant public pressure was taking a toll on her physical and mental health, and she began seriously questioning whether she could keep fighting such powerful, well-connected forces. The disparity in resources and social influence seemed impossible to overcome. Walter, seeing the impact the situation was having on Emily, began seriously considering some form of settlement. Though he still believed in his own judgment and Emily's genuine intentions, he was worried about the emotional toll the prolonged battle was taking on them both. The 18th week was marked by a tense family meeting Walter had requested, in hopes of finding a resolution. He invited Richard, Jennifer, and their children for an open conversation about the situation, hoping direct communication could resolve misunderstandings and find a solution that protected everyone's interests. The meeting took place at the mansion, with Emily present, creating a tense atmosphere. Walter began by expressing his disappointment with the family's actions and his desire to find a solution that preserved family relationships while respecting his personal choices. Richard responded by reiterating his concerns about the future of the family estate and his responsibility to protect his own children's interests. He argued that his actions, though painful, were necessary to prevent worse long-term consequences. His stance was firm and showed no signs of flexibility. Jennifer supported her husband's position, but added emotional layers to the argument. She spoke of her genuine concern for Walter's well-being and her belief that he was being exploited in ways he might not fully recognize. Her words were respectful but unyielding. The conversation grew more intense when Richard and Jennifer's children, Ethan and Noah, asked innocent yet piercing questions about the situation. Their inquiries about why the family was fighting and why everyone seemed sad brought a painful perspective on how the conflict was affecting the next generation. Emily tried to explain her position, but felt her words were being filtered through the lens of suspicion that had already been established. Every attempt at clarification seemed to only raise more doubts and skepticism. She realized she was fighting against preconceived notions resistant to contradictory evidence. The meeting ended without resolution, but with a clearer understanding of each side's irreconcilable positions. Walter realized his family was determined to pursue legal action, regardless of his personal wishes. Richard and Jennifer left, convinced they were doing the right thing, despite the emotional toll on everyone involved. The 19th week brought an unexpected development when an independent investigative journalist began examining the case more deeply. Unlike previous coverage, which had focused mainly on sensational aspects, This investigation sought to understand the deeper motivations and circumstances of everyone involved. The journalist, Michael Anderson, had built a reputation for balanced reporting on complex social issues. He was drawn to the case not just as a human interest story, but as an example of broader questions about elderly autonomy, family dynamics, and societal pressures on unconventional relationships. Michael's investigation revealed aspects of the story that hadn't been adequately covered before. He interviewed people who knew both Emily and Walter independently of the marriage, gathering insights into their characters that weren't influenced by the current conflict. Michael's interviews with Walter's former colleagues and friends revealed a man who had been consistently principled and thoughtful in his decisions for decades. Witnesses spoke of his sharp mind, genuine generosity, and lifelong tendency to help those in need. Similarly, interviews about Emily revealed a young woman who had been consistently honest and hard-working before the marriage. Teachers, former co-workers, and neighbors spoke about her character and educational aspirations, painting a picture that contradicted claims of purely financial motives. Michael's report also examined Richard and Jennifer's motivations, exploring their own financial pressures and concerns about inheritance. He discovered that Richard had made questionable investments recently and that there were financial strains in his own business that might be influencing his urgency to protect his father's estate. The 20th week was marked by the publication of Michael Anderson's investigation, which presented a much more nuanced and balanced view of the case than previous coverage. The report sparked significant public discussion about issues of elderly autonomy, prejudice against age gap relationships, and the complexity of family dynamics. The shift in public narrative put pressure on Richard and Jennifer to justify their actions more convincingly. The report had challenged some of their claims and motivations, forcing them to defend their positions more publicly and in greater detail than before. The public pressure also created opportunities for Emily and Walter to receive support from unexpected sources. Organizations advocating for seniors' rights spoke out in favor of Walter's autonomy, while groups supporting young women criticized the attacks on Emily as being based on harmful stereotypes. However, Richard was unwilling to back down. Instead, he intensified his legal efforts, submitting new documents and evidence he had gathered through even deeper investigations. His determination seemed fueled by both genuine family concerns and a desire to justify his public actions. The 21st week brought an unexpected twist when Dr. Sarah Thompson decided to publicly involve herself in the case. As Emily's doctor, she had closely observed the emotional toll the situation was taking on her patient. Though limited by medical confidentiality, she managed to make statements about Emily's emotional and mental state that supported her credibility. Dr. Thompson publicly confirmed that she had treated Emily during a period of significant emotional trauma and had noted the positive impact Walter's support had on her recovery. Without violating confidentiality, she was able to validate key aspects of Emily's narrative about her motivations and mental state. The doctor's involvement added professional credibility to Emily's defense. Dr. Thompson was a respected professional with decades of experience, and her willingness to engage publicly suggested she genuinely believed in her patient's honesty. Her statement also refocused attention on the trauma Emily had endured and how it had influenced her decisions. She framed the marriage as part of a healing process rather than an opportunistic act, offering a professional medical perspective on the situation. However, Richard's lawyers tried to downplay the impact of the doctor's statement, arguing that healthcare professionals could be influenced by incomplete information from their patients. They suggested Dr. Thompson was basing her conclusions solely on Emily's version of events without full knowledge of all circumstances. The 22nd week was marked by intense preparations for what appeared to be a prolonged legal battle. Both sides were mobilizing significant resources and crafting complex strategies for the formal proceedings that now seemed inevitable. The situation had escalated beyond a family conflict into a high-profile legal case. Walter and Emily's lawyers were building a defense based on evidence of mental capacity, genuine motivations, and character testimonies. They planned to present the marriage as a mutually beneficial arrangement between two capable adults, both seeking companionship and support during challenging periods of their lives. On the other hand, Richard's lawyers were developing a strategy focused on undue influence and exploitation of emotional vulnerability. They intended to argue that Walter had been manipulated during a time of loneliness and that Emily had deliberately exploited his vulnerabilities for personal gain. Preparing for the lawsuit was consuming significant emotional and financial resources from all parties. Walter was spending substantial amounts on legal representation while also dealing with the stress of seeing his family torn apart by the conflict. Emily was battling depression and anxiety caused by the constant pressure and public attacks. The 23rd week brought an additional complication when concerns arose about Walter's health. The prolonged stress from the legal and family conflict was clearly affecting his physical condition. His doctors expressed concern about the impact the situation was having on his cardiovascular health and recommended a significant reduction in stress. The medical concerns added a new dimension to the case, with Walter's lawyers arguing that Richard's actions were actively harming his father's health. They suggested that the stress of the legal proceedings could have serious consequences for a 74-year-old man, regardless of his mental capacity. Richard, however, argued that the health concerns only confirmed his position that his father needed protection from decisions causing unnecessary stress in his life. He claimed that resolving the situation through proper legal channels would, in the long run, be better for Walter's health and well-being. The irony of the situation was not lost on outside observers. Richard was causing significant stress to his father in an attempt to protect him from stress. This contradiction began to undermine the credibility of his claims that he was acting primarily in Walter's best interest. The 24th week was marked by a court-facilitated mediation attempt. A professional mediator was assigned to try and find a resolution that could satisfy all parties without the need for a prolonged public trial. The mediation offered an opportunity for more structured and less adversarial communication. During the sessions, each side had the chance to present their positions in greater detail and nuance than had been possible in previous interactions. The mediator facilitated discussions about each party's core interests, trying to identify areas of possible compromise. Walter expressed his fundamental desire to maintain his personal autonomy while also preserving important family relationships. He was willing to consider measures that could reassure his family about financial matters, as long as they didn't compromise his ability to make his own personal decisions. Emily, in turn, expressed her willingness to relinquish any financial claims to Walter's estate if it could resolve the family conflict. She emphasized that her primary motivation had been finding stability and support during a difficult time, not long-term financial gain. Richard and Jennifer presented their concerns about the future of the family estate and their duty to protect their children's interests. However, they also expressed some willingness to consider solutions that preserved Walter's dignity while providing the reassurances they felt were necessary. The 25th week saw gradual progress in the mediation negotiations. The mediator successfully facilitated discussions about possible compromises that could address the concerns of all parties. The proposals included financial arrangements that would protect the family estate, while allowing Walter to maintain autonomy over his personal decisions. One of the most promising proposals involved creating a trust that would safeguard the majority of Walter's assets for his designated heirs, while still allowing him to retain sufficient resources for his own life and to support Emily as he saw fit. This arrangement would address Richard's financial concerns without requiring the annulment of the marriage. Emily expressed willingness to sign agreements limiting her rights to the estate, demonstrating that her motivations were not primarily financial. Her readiness to make these sacrifices began to convince some family members of the sincerity of her intentions. However, negotiations still faced significant obstacles. Jennifer remained hesitant about any solution that allowed Emily to remain part of the family, arguing that it would validate what she still considered an inappropriate relationship. Her objections were based on both practical concerns and moral principles. The 26th week brought a significant shift when Ethan and Noah, Walter's grandchildren, asked to speak with their grandfather privately. The children, now with a better understanding of the situation from overheard conversations at home, expressed confusion about why the family was fighting and sadness over the deterioration of family relationships. The conversation with his grandchildren had a profound impact on Walter. He realized the conflict was affecting the next generation of the family in ways he hadn't fully considered. The children were confused about complex adult issues and were being exposed to levels of family tension that could impact their emotional well-being. The grandchildren also expressed genuine curiosity about Emily, asking why everyone was angry with her when she seemed kind in the few interactions they'd had. Their innocent perspectives offered a sharp contrast to the suspicions and hostilities of the adults, reminding Walter of the importance of maintaining healthy family relationships. Concern for his grandchildren's well-being motivated Walter to intensify his efforts to find a resolution. He realized that, regardless of his own convictions about the marriage, he had responsibilities to the next generation that demanded finding ways to preserve family harmony. The 27th week was marked by a surprising revelation when Michael Anderson, the investigative journalist, uncovered information about Richard's own financial difficulties. His investigation revealed that Richard had made risky investments, resulting in significant losses, creating financial pressures that may have influenced his urgency to protect his father's inheritance. The revelation about Richard's financial struggles cast new light on his motivations. While his concerns about the family estate might have been genuine, there were also personal issues that could have been influencing his intensity and urgency. The discovery raised questions about whether he was acting primarily in his father's best interest or in his own financial interest. The information also exposed hypocrisy in some of Richard's criticisms of Emily's motives. While he accused her of financial interest, his own actions may have been driven by personal financial pressures. This revelation undermined his moral and legal credibility. Jennifer was visibly shaken by the news about her husband's financial situation. She had supported his actions, believing they were motivated purely by legitimate family concerns. Discovering there were personal financial pressures involved forced her to reevaluate her own position in the conflict. The 28th week saw a shift in the negotiation dynamics when Jennifer began showing more openness to compromise. The revelations about Richard's motivations had shaken her confidence in the moral righteousness of her stance, and she started questioning whether they were doing the right thing for the family as a whole. Jennifer asked to have a private conversation with Emily, the first genuinely cordial interaction between them since the wedding. During that talk, Jennifer expressed her own vulnerabilities and concerns, admitting that some of her actions had been influenced by pressures from her husband that she hadn't fully understood. The conversation between Jennifer and Emily was a pivotal moment in the resolution process. Jennifer managed to see Emily as an individual with her own struggles and traumas, rather than just a threat to the family. Emily, in turn, gained a better understanding of the concerns and pressures Jennifer was facing. During this conversation, Jennifer did something unexpected. She apologized for some of the more hostile actions she had taken. She admitted that she had allowed worries and pressures to lead her to treat Emily unfairly, without truly trying to understand her perspective or motivations. The 29th week saw significant progress in negotiations, facilitated by Jennifer's change in attitude. With her taking a more conciliatory stance, the pressure on Richard to maintain inflexible positions began to ease. He started considering the compromise proposals more seriously. The mediator managed to facilitate more productive discussions about financial arrangements that could protect everyone's interests. The proposals evolved to include specific safeguards for the family estate, while allowing Walter and Emily to maintain their personal autonomy and relationship. One of the most promising proposals involved a retroactive prenuptial agreement that would limit Emily's rights to the estate, but would be structured in a respectful way that acknowledged the legitimacy of the marriage. This arrangement would offer the protections Richard sought without requiring the public humiliation of an annulment. Emily expressed genuine willingness to accept these limitations, demonstrating once again that her motivations weren't primarily financial. Her cooperation helped build trust with family members who had previously been hostile. The 30th week brought the first family meeting in months, where all parties were genuinely working toward a solution. The atmosphere was still tense, but there was a palpable sense that real progress was being made. The negotiations focused on specific details of the proposed arrangements. Walter expressed satisfaction with the progress, but also set clear boundaries on what he was willing to accept. He insisted that any agreement must preserve his dignity and autonomy, as well as treat Emily with respect. His conditions were firm but reasonable. Richard, pressured by the revelations about his own financial motivations, adopted a more collaborative stance. He admitted that some of his actions had been excessive and expressed willingness to work toward a solution that protected everyone's interests without completely destroying family relationships. The children, Ethan and Noah, were included in some of the discussions in an age-appropriate way. Their presence reminded all the adults of the importance of finding solutions that preserved the family's well-being for future generations. The 31st week saw the finalization of the agreement's details. The terms included specific financial arrangements that would protect the majority of Walter's estate for the designated heirs while allowing him to retain adequate resources to support himself and Emily. The agreement also included provisions for Emily's continued education, reflecting Walter's support for her academic aspirations. Importantly, the agreement recognized the validity and legitimacy of the marriage, avoiding the public humiliation an annulment would have caused. This acknowledgement was crucial to preserving the dignity of both Walter and Emily while providing the assurances the family had sought. The agreement also included provisions for gradual family reconciliation, with clear expectations for respectful behavior from all parties. There was explicit recognition that healthy family relationships required effort and good faith from everyone involved. Emily signed the agreement without hesitation, once again demonstrating her sincerity about her motivations. Her willingness to accept significant limitations on financial rights finally convinced even the most skeptical family members of her genuine intentions. The 32nd week was dedicated to implementing the agreement and taking the first steps toward family reconciliation. The legal actions were formally withdrawn, and public statements were made explaining that the family had resolved their differences privately and to mutual satisfaction. The media reacted positively to the resolution, with many observers praising the maturity and wisdom shown by all parties in finding a solution that preserved family relationships while addressing legitimate concerns. The story became an example of how complex family conflicts could be resolved through communication and compromise. Walter expressed relief and satisfaction with the resolution. He had managed to maintain his autonomy and dignity while preserving important family relationships. His trust in Emily had been vindicated, and he felt validated in his personal choices. Emily felt immensely relieved by the end of the legal and social pressures. She had succeeded in proving her sincerity and building acceptance within the family, even if limited. Most importantly, she had found the stability and support that would allow her to rebuild her life and pursue her educational goals. The 33rd week marked the beginning of a new chapter for everyone involved. Richard and Jennifer began the process of rebuilding their relationships with Walter and Emily, acknowledging that their earlier actions had been excessive, even if motivated by understandable concerns. Family dynamics gradually began to normalize, though with a new awareness of the complexities of intergenerational relationships. Ethan and Noah expressed joy at the easing of tensions, and their youthful presence helped motivate all the adults to focus on preserving family harmony. Emily began preparing to resume her medical studies, supported both financially and emotionally by Walter. Her dream of becoming a doctor, which had been interrupted by trauma and financial hardship, finally seemed attainable again. The 34th week saw the first genuinely harmonious family events in nearly a year. A Sunday dinner at the mansion included Richard, Jennifer, and the children, creating an atmosphere that, while still cautious, showed real progress toward reconciliation. During the dinner, Richard publicly apologized to Emily for the invasive investigations and personal attacks he had promoted. His apologies were sincere and specific, acknowledging the impact his actions had had on her. Emily graciously accepted the apologies, showing maturity beyond her years. Jennifer also expressed regret for her earlier hostility, admitting she had let prejudices and pressures lead her to judge Emily unfairly. She praised the strength and dignity Emily had shown during the difficult period. The children, Ethan and Noah, began developing a genuine relationship with Emily, seeing her as an interesting new aunt rather than a threat to the family. Their natural, affectionate interactions helped normalize Emily's presence in the family. The 35th week was marked by the first public appearance of the entire family together since the original wedding. They attended a concert at the Metropolitan Opera House, publicly demonstrating they had resolved their differences. The appearance was noted by the media as a sign of successful reconciliation. During the event, the family presented a united front, with interactions that seemed genuine rather than merely polite. Walter and Emily appeared relaxed and happy, while Richard and Jennifer showed genuine acceptance of the situation. The children seemed especially pleased with the restoration of family harmony. The 36th week saw Emily officially enroll in medical school at one of New York City's top universities. Her admission was based on her own academic merits, with financial support secured through the arrangements with Walter. The moment represented the fulfillment of a dream that had been delayed by difficult circumstances. The 37th week brought the first family celebration since the wedding, marking Walter's 75th birthday. The party was an intimate gathering that included close family and a few friends, signaling the complete normalization of family relations. During the celebration, Walter gave an emotional speech about family, forgiveness, and the importance of supporting one another through hard times. He thanked everyone for working through their differences and expressed optimism about the family's future. The 38th week was significant because it marked a year since Emily had first met Walter. They used the occasion to reflect on the extraordinary journey they had shared, from their first meeting through the family crisis to the current reconciliation. The 39th week saw Emily officially begin her medical studies. Her first day at university was exciting and meaningful, representing not just the start of a new educational chapter, but also the overcoming of significant obstacles that could have permanently derailed her dreams. Walter accompanied Emily to campus on her first day, proudly showing his support for her educational aspirations. His presence was a testament to his genuine interest in Emily's well-being and success, validating the motivations they had both claimed during the conflict. The 40th week was marked by successful visits from Karen and Robert to the mansion. Emily's parents, who had initially been uncomfortable with the whole situation, began developing real relationships with Walter and even with Richard and Jennifer. Karen expressed gratitude to Walter for supporting Emily through such a difficult time. She had witnessed firsthand the trauma her daughter had endured and recognized the positive role Walter had played in her recovery. Robert, initially the most skeptical of the parents, gradually developed respect for Walter. He appreciated the respectful way Walter treated Emily and her family, as well as his genuine support for her educational ambitions. The 41st week saw the first time Tyler visited the mansion by invitation. Walter had suggested that it was important for Emily to maintain healthy friendships from her past, as long as they were based on mutual respect and understanding of their current circumstances. Tyler's visit was initially uncomfortable, but gradually became more natural. He had managed to process his own feelings about the end of their relationship and could see that Emily had found stability and happiness in her new life. Tyler apologized to Emily for some of the hurtful things he had said during their previous encounters. He acknowledged that his own pain and confusion had led him to be unfair to her during a time when she was also suffering. The 42nd week was significant because it marked the first moment since the wedding that Emily felt completely at peace with her choices. The stress of family conflict had eased, her studies were going well, and she had found her place in the extended family. Walter watched with satisfaction as Emily flourished in her new environment. He saw the progress she was making in her studies, the development of healthy family relationships, and her emotional recovery from the trauma she had experienced. The 43rd week brought a special celebration when Emily received her first top grade on an important medical exam. Walter organized a small but meaningful dinner to honor her academic achievement, showing that his motivations for supporting her were genuine and lasting. The 44th week saw Richard making specific gestures of reconciliation, including invitations for Emily to attend family events that had previously been exclusive to blood relatives. These gestures symbolized his genuine acceptance of her as part of the family. The 45th twist came when Jennifer surprised everyone by offering specific help with Emily's medical studies. Having a doctor friend, she offered to make connections that could benefit Emily's education and future career opportunities. A year after the original wedding, the Richardson-Johnson family had undergone a complete transformation. What had begun as a controversial relationship and a devastating family conflict had evolved into an example of how understanding, communication, and commitment can overcome seemingly irreconcilable differences. Walter and Emily had proven that relationships based on mutual respect and genuine support can thrive, even in the face of skepticism and significant opposition. Their marriage, though unconventional, had become a source of stability and growth for both of them. The wider family had learned valuable lessons about judgment, prejudice, and the importance of open communication. Richard and Jennifer had discovered that their initial concerns, while understandable, had been based on incorrect assumptions about Emily's motivations and character. The children, Ethan and Noah, had benefited from the resolution of the conflict through the example of how adults can work through differences and find solutions that preserve important family relationships. They had learned about forgiveness, compromise, and the complexity of human connections. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Emily's parents, Karen and Robert, had made peace with their daughter's choices and developed an appreciation for the support Walter had provided during a crucial time in her life. They had learned to look beyond surface appearances to understand deeper motivations and circumstances. Even Tyler had grown through the experience, learning to process loss and change in a more mature way. He had developed a deeper understanding of relationships and how people can take different paths in life without diminishing the value of the connections they shared. The media and the general public had witnessed a powerful example of how seemingly scandalous stories often hold complexities and nuances that aren't immediately obvious. The case had sparked important discussions about the autonomy of the elderly, prejudices against unconventional relationships, and the importance of withholding judgment until all the facts are known. Michael Anderson, the investigative journalist, had used the case as the foundation for a broader series on intergenerational relationships and complex family dynamics. His work had contributed to a more nuanced public understanding of these issues. Dr. Sarah Thompson had seen one of her patients overcome significant trauma and find stability and purpose in her life. As a medical professional, she had witnessed the power of compassion and support in fostering emotional healing. As the story drew to a close, all the main characters had experienced significant personal growth. They had confronted their prejudices, worked through complex conflicts, and found ways to preserve important relationships while respecting individual choices. Emily Johnson had not only found financial stability and educational opportunities, but also a family that accepted and supported her. She had proven her sincerity and built genuine relationships that would outlast the circumstances that had initially brought them together. Walter Richardson had found renewed purpose in his final years, as well as validation of his judgment and personal autonomy. He had managed to make a positive difference in someone else's life while maintaining important family ties. Richardson had learned about the unintended consequences of well-intentioned actions and the importance of questioning his own motivations. He had grown as a person through the process of facing his own shortcomings and working to make amends. Jennifer had discovered the importance of getting to know people as individuals before forming judgments based on superficial circumstances. She had developed empathy and understanding that made her a wiser and more compassionate person. The story of Emily and Walter had become a testament to the power of compassion, understanding, and perseverance in overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. Their marriage, which had begun amid suspicion and conflict, had evolved into a relationship, built on mutual respect, genuine support, and familial love. 2 years after the wedding, Emily was thriving in her medical studies, moving closer to fulfilling her long-held dreams. Walter remained active and engaged, finding joy in supporting his young wife's aspirations and in maintaining repaired relationships with his family. The Richardson-Johnson family had become an example of how differences can be overcome through honest communication, a willingness to admit mistakes, and a commitment to preserving important relationships. Their journey from conflict to reconciliation had been difficult, but it had resulted in stronger family bonds and deeper understanding. The true revelation of the story wasn't just about Emily's motivations for marriage, but about how prejudices and assumptions can create unnecessary conflict. The family had learned that complex truths often lie behind simple appearances, and that hasty judgments can cause significant harm. When everyone finally understood that Emily had married Walter not out of greed, but as part of a mutual healing process after devastating personal trauma, they realized their suspicions had not only been wrong, but cruel toward a young woman who had already suffered so much. The story ended with a family celebration, where everyone was present, including Karen, Robert, Richard, Jennifer, Ethan, Noah, and even Tyler as a family friend. It was a reunion that had seemed impossible during the darkest months of the conflict, but now represented the possibility of overcoming and reconciliation. Emily, now 21 and flourishing in her medical studies, had found not only stability, but also a family that supported and believed in her. Walter, at 76, had found renewed purpose and satisfaction in seeing the positive results of his decision to help a young woman in need. The final scene of the story showed the family gathered in the mansion's garden, with Walter and Emily sitting together on a bench, watching the children play while the adults talked peacefully. It was a picture of harmony that had been hard-won through much suffering, but now represented the triumph of understanding over prejudice, love over suspicion, and family over conflict. The true happy ending wasn't just about Emily and Walter's marriage, but about how an entire family had grown, learned, and strengthened itself through one of the most challenging crises they had ever faced. They had discovered that family, love can overcome almost any obstacle, as long as everyone is willing to work toward understanding and reconciliation. The end. Now, tell us what you thought of Emily and Walter's story. Do you think they made the right decisions? How would you react if you were a family member? Leave your honest opinion about this journey of love, conflict, and reconciliation in the comments. We'd love to read your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.